Thanks for checking out another episode of the Fulton Church podcast. Today we're going to be talking about our busy calendars. I think in a lot of ways this issue has become a kind of silent killer. Silent in that it is just every parent's experience. We're all running around constantly, running our kids to school, sports, clubs. There's just so much. It is the cultural norm for our kids to be involved in at least one sport or extracurricular in each season, at least one, if not two, three, or four. And killer because it seems to be having some negative consequences on us as parents, within our kids, and our families as a whole. This is an issue that has been present for a while, but it's only ramping up and becoming more and more of an issue. We, as parents, need to at least have a conversation about our calendars and to be praying about how God would have us steward our family's time. This podcast episode is meant to help start that conversation. Joining me to talk about our hectic calendars is Pastor John Mahlstedt. Pastor John is a husband, father of three, and next-gen pastor at Northbrook Church. We had a great conversation on the challenges of busyness and how we can intentionally approach our calendars for God's glory. So, let's get to it. Let's talk about full calendars with Pastor John Mahlstedt. All right, John, let's start the conversation here. Just tell us a little bit about the season of life you're in right now. Honestly, what does the calendar look like right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us in this season, we are a sports family, right? Like we're that family. I grew up playing sports, and so for those that don't know our family, we have three kids, and so our youngest is 10, girl, and then we have a 13-year-old boy, and then we have a sophomore in high school that's a girl. And so this summer, we will have all three in select travel sports. Not travel as like all over the country, but travel as in it is they are on select teams. So I did some math before we came on the podcast, and at a minimum, our family will have 85 games by the end of July. So between the three kids. And they could have more, right? If they have tournaments and they win more games, so 85 is kind of the minimum, and that doesn't include practices. So, which, they've already been doing practices, and then they'll have some practices during the season. So, most nights we're at a field, most weekends we're at a field. And so, this is a very relevant topic because our family's living it and trying to discern what it looks like to live life well, while also letting our kids have opportunities. And we'll get into this later, but we enjoy sports. So, but that's our calendar. And, in the winter, it doesn't get much better. All three play basketball. So in the winter, our calendar will look similar. So, while there are certainly some months where it slows down, we're definitely one of those families that is constantly running around.
Yeah.
How about you? What's your calendar like?
Yeah, fairly similar right now in the spring. All three of my kids are in soccer. We're a big soccer family.
That's okay. No one's perfect.
Yeah, right. So kids are 10, 12, and 14. So they're all three of them now are in what we refer to as the travel soccer teams in Edgerton. And that is new within the last calendar year or so, having all three kids and having, just two of us as adults. I'm sure you encounter this, there's just, sometimes they're in different places on the same day, and that's chaos. But the calendar's pretty full of stuff. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are practice nights. Well, oftentimes on Saturday and or Sundays, we'll have games and kind of spread out all over the greater Madison area. So we can be traveling an hour and a half one day. And that's just it's kind of just constant soccer right now. And as I think of the calendar more over the course of a year, our fall looks fairly similar. Our winter is a little chaotic with some futsal or indoor soccer, and then 2 kids in basketball. That's kind of a newer thing for us too. So the winter used to be kind of our down season. Now it isn't. Now our down season is the summer, because our soccer will end early June, and then we have until that starts up again in late August. So that's kind of our season. John, do you guys have any kind of a down season, or is it just pretty much go from start to finish?
Yeah, so August is typically a down season, or at least part of actually pretty much all of August is down season. September can be slower. But then I would say October through February is basketball. March is usually a slower month down, and then April we start hitting softball, baseball. So yeah, I'd say August and March are usually our 2 slow months out of the year. And other than that, we're going somewhere on a given night, typically, either practice or games.
Yeah, that's a rapid. I mean, to have 10 of your 12 months, pretty much, and I don't know if I think mine might be 9 of the 12 months where we're just kind of going. That's a rapid pace that you start to feel for sure.
Yeah, we try to, we'll get into this, but yeah, I mean, there's conversations. But when you have 3 in sports, our culture's definitely shifted. Even from when I grew up, it's definitely, it's hard to eat. It's either all or nothing. It feels like
Mhm.
with youth sports, it's either they're super involved or they struggle to enjoy it because they're behind the other kids.
Yeah. Uh-huh. It's interesting thinking back to our childhood. I mean, we're not super old. We're not young though either, I guess. Congrats
Speak
on
for
your
yourself.
40th. Congrats on your 40th birthday, by the way.
Speak for yourself.
Um, so I don't know if back in the day, if travel sports just wasn't as much a thing, or if it was just starting or just catching on. But I mean, I never participated in any travel sports. All the sports that I participated in were just kind of rec, in the same town, playing against other teams that were from the same town. So we had like, a practice a week and then maybe a game a week or something. But now it just seems like there are just so many things for our kids to do, in different levels of participating in those activities, right? For us, for soccer, for you, for baseball, there's, going to be like recreational kind of teams, and then there's going to be teams that travel, and sometimes, like I know in our community, if you play a sport that in a travel league, you would also have to play the rec league. So that's like 3 practices a week and multiple games a week. And I see kids like doing multiple things in a season. I don't know if you see this as much, but kids who are in baseball, who are in soccer, who are running track, who are singing a choir concert and a like our last week, I was trying to have soccer practices, and we had half our kids show up because that week they had track and they had choir, and like all these things were happening at the same time. So there just is, it feels like there's more to do now than there was back when I was growing up, or maybe I just didn't do as much, but it just seems like there's more opportunities for our kids to engage. And I think there's like this pressure we have as parents too. Like we feel like we need to get our kids in as much as possible to help create these well-rounded adults, to give them all these opportunities, to give them opportunities to exercise and stay fit, and just to get around other kids and to socialize. And I think we feel this pressure as parents to just get our kids in as much stuff, because first of all, that's what everyone else is doing. Um, Everyone's kids are doing multiple things, are so deeply involved in so many things. So there's that cultural pressure. And I think it kind of leaves us in a place as parents where we feel like we're not, if we're not doing as much, that maybe our kids aren't getting opportunities that some of the other kids are facing. Do you see any of that in your context?
Yeah. No, I just asked how much. I was curious. So I looked at in the 2000s, the youth sports industry in the U.S. raked in about 5 billion a year,
Wow.
which is still a lot,
Yeah.
right? 5 billion a year. That's a big animal, the youth sports industry. But any guesses on how much it rakes in per year as of 2023?
Oh man, 7 trillion.
Not quite, not quite. 30 billion.
Wow.
So in the space of 20 years, we've gone from an industry that makes 5 billion to an industry that's making 30 billion.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think the question of are youth sports a little crazier than when we grew up? I think the answer would be yes. And for sure, I see kids playing multiple sports in the same year, missing practices for a different sport, missing games for a different sport, juggling. And again, I'm not judging those families, but I'm saying I think, yes, there is this pull to do multiple things. I think comparison, right? Like in the early 2000s, like we didn't have social media. We didn't know what anyone was doing unless like you chatted with someone.
Yeah.
Now you see families on social media and you don't want to be left out. They're going to tournaments, their kids hitting a home run, their kids making the game winning shot. And you're like, well, I want my kid to experience that stuff. So, absolutely. I feel like we live in a society now where whether it's comparison, whether it's not wanting our kids to miss out, whether it's just the industry that's kind of sucked us into, and it is an industry, again, $30 billion industry in the US. So absolutely. I think it's grown. And again, we're not, you and I are not on the outside pointing fingers at people in it. Like we're in it. And there's some good things about it that I'm sure we'll discuss, but absolutely. I think it's grown and it's going to be interesting over the years. I always laugh because, if you listen to people, sports experts, they say, have your kid play multiple sports, like don't have them specialize in one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's awesome. But also,
Right.
like, unless it's just like casual rec, that can be a lot, right? To play multiple sports. And I do think kids should play multiple sports, but that can quickly eat up all your time.
Yeah. It's so difficult to find a balance. So we've been kind of framing this conversation as if being busy is a problem. But is it? Like, is it really that big of an issue to be so busy, to jam pack our calendar with all these things, to have our kids in multiple things at the same time? Is that, I mean, there is good, right? We'll talk about that. But is it really that big of a problem? Why is busyness harmful, or when does it become harmful, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, busyness, I think God created us to be active, right? Like, I think God created us to pursue things we're good at, pursue things that interest us. And so, I'd be the first to say that I don't think having things on the calendar is a bad thing. And I know you would agree, but I think where it starts to become harmful is when we can't enjoy what we're doing because we're so overwhelmed with the pace of life. Or we start to feel stressed when we think about the calendar. We start to feel rushed. We start living at a pace where it's hard to enjoy the moment because we got 20 other moments ahead of us and we're just we're just going from thing to thing. So for me, I think that's where I start to wonder, okay, are we living well, or are we trying to pack a ton of things into our life thinking the more stuff we pack into our life equals a better life? Because I don't believe that. I don't believe that the more you pack into your life, the better your life gets. And I think most people know that, but it's just so easy to continue to pack things into our lives, our schedules. If our calendar has an opening, let's fill it. But I think, once we're not able to enjoy our life, once we're able to not be present in the moment, once we start to feel that stress or that anxiety of all the things on the calendar, then obviously it's a problem.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, I think that's really good. Yeah. So maybe that's like a good question for us to ask in the middle of these seasons is, does this feel like a problem? How is this, is it helping or is it harming? What is it doing? I came across a study, I think it was a Pew Research survey, says around 74% of parents with kids under the age of 18 sometimes felt too busy to enjoy life. Like if that's such a big percentage of parents with kids, because their parents are probably working full time. I mean, most houses, both adults are working, if not full time, at least part time. So there's that, and then to balance just everything else that comes with being a parent, getting kids off to school, and then you add all these extra curriculars to that schedule. I mean, if you're just going at such a frantic pace, you're never home, you're never really with each other, spending quality time. You're going to start to wear that and feel that. And apparently, there's a large percentage of people in this demographic that feel that. So I think you're right. I think that's when it starts to become a problem, when you start to feel that. I've had some people ask, just what's going on in life, and I'll say busy, but it's all good things. And I think these things can be fulfilling. I think they can be good. They can be good for us as a family. They can be good for us as individuals. They can be good for our kids. Obviously, there's components of all these things that are good and helpful for our kids and to engage in those things. But we have to be, I don't know, it's hard to do that, but I think we have to kind of have our finger on the pulse of our family and be able to look at each other and kind of ask ourselves from time to time, are we okay? Like, are we handling this well? Are we overly anxious? Because the reality is, like, when we're overly anxious, that just trickles down to the rest of our family. I know my kids pick up on my anxiety instantaneously, and it starts to produce anxiety in them. So if like you're able to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and kind of assess where your family's at, I think that's probably a good first step in that process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. And then I think, it starts to trickle into not only are we anxious or tired, but then, it's when our calendars are busy, we can say we prioritize other things like church or prioritize, relationships with friends, but really our priorities are on our calendar, right? And so I think sometimes when we're busy, our priorities get out of whack, and we know it, but we feel like we can't do anything about it. And so, yeah, I think that's another side of it, is it becomes a problem when what we say we prioritize is not actually what we're prioritizing on the calendar.
Yeah, and as both you and I being pastors and have been in church ministry for, let's just say, a while, I know I've seen the consequences of this kind of firsthand through other families that have been a part of my ministries. Families who would, for all intents and purposes, be, a core member of a church or whatever, at least a normal attender, and then for certain seasons, just be completely gone for like months on end. So that's something that my wife and I talk about frequently, even right now, is how do we ourselves prioritize correctly, but then how do we kind of help our kids and model that for our kids. We want our chief priority to be our relationship with Jesus as followers of Christ and his kingdom. And a big part of that and what that looks like, and a very important part of that is coming together as his body, as a community of followers in church, and modeling to our kids that's important. But that's difficult because a lot of our kids' games are on Sundays and kind of taking us away from that. So we talk often about where is that line? Like, how do we find that balance of, we made this commitment to this team, but also we have this priority, this highest commitment and highest calling as members of Christ's body. And that's important as well. How do you guys process that? I know we struggle with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something all families have to wrestle with. And again, as a pastor, I recognize that the church is not a building, right? We are the church. We go out into the world and we are God's hands and feet. However, God has chosen to use groups of Christians working together in unity. That's the plan, right? Like we are the church as a family, as a unit. God is, one of Jesus' last prayer was there be unity among his followers. And so for me, it's about, I don't want to be legalistic, and
Yeah.
everyone has different convictions on this, so for me, I won't say, well, we can never miss when the doors are open at church. We always got to be there. But rather, for me, it's a value of, we as a family value the community of the church. And so we're going to prioritize that while also prioritizing, youth sports. And so while, we feel like there's a lot of great things that youth sports teaches our kids, we prioritize the community of the church, because what we don't want is that our kids see no value in the community that is the church, and all their community is happening on sports teams.
Yeah.
Because Fuller Institute's work shows that one of the ways we keep kids engaged as followers of Jesus is to show them the value of Christian community.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we don't prioritize that and value that, we're in danger of our kids leaving high school and saying, well, why do I need Christian community?
Yeah.
For 18 years, my community has been my sports team or my drama club or the band. So why all of a sudden now do I have to seek out Christian community?
Right.
So that's the value, right? And I don't want to be legalistic about it, but I want to make sure my kids understand the value of Christian community and their friend groups being inside the church, and not only that, but serving in the church. That's the other part of Fuller's research, was that kids that stay Christians after high school serve in the local church and use their giftings in the local church. And so it's not just about the community, it's also about realizing that I'm not just a consumer,
Mm-hmm.
but I am a producer in the kingdom of God, and I get to use my talents and gifts in the local church because that is God's plan. And so we want to value that too. And we want to give them those opportunities to serve in the local church, realizing that we want them to see when they graduate high school that they have gifts and talents, and the local church needs them, not in the sense that, they're this big deal, but rather that God's design is for them to use their talents and gifts in a local church setting.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, in the youth ministry circle, there's like this stat, right? So it's, back in the day, it was like 80% of kids, I don't even know what it is now, but 80% of kids when they graduate high school kind of walk away from their faith for good. I don't know if that's worse or better now. It's probably been a long time since I've come in contact with that. But the idea is like a lot of kids when they graduate are walking away. And what's the reason for that? I think you stated kind of perfectly some things that we can do to kind of help our kids along as they are living their lives as Jesus followers and what that looks like. I think one thing too is like having adult mentors, like good Christian adult mentors in their life too. And so I think a lot of these things, all these things happen within the context of community. It's kind of the nature of the church and what it's meant to do. So if we, again, without trying to be legalistic, and I think that's going to be different from household to household, but I'm trying to keep your pulse on, how are we doing spiritually as well? How are we feeling connected to the church? Are we feeling connected to God too? Those are important questions. I do have one thing that I want to talk about just as fathers, as I'm thinking about is busyness a problem? And I think this maybe specifically pertains to travel sports, but I think as dads, sometimes we put a lot of our own identity in how our kids perform. So something that I'm always trying to be cognizant of is how I am interacting with my kids as they are engaged in sports. There's another study, 70% of young athletes quit before age 13, primarily because it isn't fun anymore. And that one kind of hit me a little bit because I know there have been times where I've caught myself in the middle of rants, with my kids, if they didn't perform a certain way or whatever, if their effort wasn't up to whatever standard. So I can see, and I see in the faces of a lot of these kids that I'm interacting with, who I'm coaching or who are on my kids' teams, who just have such a high level of pressure that they're experiencing in their home when it comes to these certain things, and the anxiety that it produces in kids as well. So I know with my kids, I'm trying to first of all control myself. I have a rule that when I'm in the car, I can't coach my kids. on the way home from stuff. And that's really, really difficult to do because I usually take notes of all the things that my kids need to do better.
Oh,
But then also realizing that that just has not been helpful for them and not wanting to put that kind of pressure on them as well. So I think that's another thing to consider as well as, and that's again going to be very case by case, but how are our kids experiencing these things? Are they things that they enjoy, that they have fun doing? Or are we as parents sometimes taking away from the fun that they're experiencing because of maybe how much of our own identity is tied up in how they perform, and the pressures that we put on them as well. So I'm always trying to be conscious of that. And it just makes me so sad as I listen sometimes to some parents as they're hollering at their kids in the middle of a game or whatever. And um, that's not healthy for them as well. And that would be the end result of that is quitting and disconnecting from that as well. So that's an unfortunate, I think, thing that we see happening in our sports as well.
yeah. No, I think that's so good. Yeah, um, I think, whether it's the sports world or whether it's whatever, music world or any sort of extracurricular activity your kid's in, it's taking your identity as the parent out of it, and not projecting on your kid, and adding pressure and making sure they are doing it because they love it and not because they're trying to please you or you're trying to live. We all know, unfortunately, we all can picture the parent that's trying to relive their childhood through their kid, and it's just not a fair burden to place on a kid. So absolutely, I completely agree.
Yeah, it's so easy to do, unfortunately.
Yeah. So if we are going to prioritize, we talked a little bit about prioritizing church. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But I think, the other thing that is important when we think about priorities is just this idea of resting, right? Of Sabbath, of, whether you practice the Sabbath or whether, as a family, you don't really practice the Sabbath, but you realize the importance of rest. I think we can get into seasons where we don't give our kids opportunities to just be kids, to just rest. We'll give ourselves time to rest, to enjoy the day that God has given us. And so I think when you think about prioritizing your calendar, realizing that sometimes saying no to something to create opportunities to just be a family is just as important as the things you say yes to.
Yeah. There there is a theological significance to rest, right? I've always been kind of interested and fascinated in this reality that we have a creation story, right? And baked into that creation story is rest, the Sabbath. And God certainly doesn't need to rest. He's fine. He doesn't have limits in the way that we do. But he rested as a way to provide an example for us that this is important. Like this is something that the roots of our Christian faith and Judaism, like it was just baked in. It was something that was so important to them and they held so dear. Like all things, when we humans get our hands on it, we kind of make it something different. But it is something from the very beginning. God said, "This is good. This is important, and you need to do it." And I think from the very beginning, so we're created with limits. Like we're not divine beings in the way that God is, with the limitlessness of Him, with limitless energy and ability to do whatever. We don't have that. We have limits, so we need to rest. And I think in our culture, just we miss that. We don't think we do, or maybe it's like a point of pride in us that like, oh, we don't need to rest. Like we can go constantly every single day and we're good, but that's just not the reality. Like there comes a time where you're going to hit a wall and you're going to need to refresh and rest. So that just is created in us. And when we try to usurp that or ignore that, it becomes a problem, and you start to see the results of that. I think just kind of anecdotally recently, I think this happened like a week ago where we had soccer practice, and it was in a week after a weekend where some of our kids had multiple soccer games, like several, like there was a soccer tournament in town, and many of them played mini games. And then on Monday, trying to practice, and just they were completely gassed and exhausted. Because not only do they have the soccer tournament, but they have all the other stuff in life that they're dealing with. So we're just not, it was, for me, it was a reminder of this very real reality that we, as humans, were created with limits and just so desperately need to take time to rest. It's so important, and it trickles into every corner of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember a fascinating, I was reading a book on athletes, and it had a lot to do with mental, just kind of your mental toughness. But as kind of a side note in the book, it talked about how when professional athletes get sometimes they'll hire like a trainer, or they'll hire, someone to come in and help them improve their game. And it mentioned that one of the first things that a lot of times professional trainers or coaches the first thing they'll do is see how much rest they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes they'll tell them, no, you need to actually rest more. So where you would expect someone to come in and be like, oh, you got to practice more, a lot of times professional coaches, trainers will come in and evaluate, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, you need to get more sleep, you need to get more rest to function at your best. Right. And so, yeah, to your point, sometimes we forget that as families and as kids, not just so they can be more productive, but just because we were designed as people that are designed to rest. And I think, rest is look different for our family in different seasons. When you have little kids at home, right, a Sabbath or a rest can be difficult. And so I think sometimes you have to get creative. I know when our kids were younger, sometimes rest meant one of us got to rest, right? So I took the kids and my wife rested, or vice versa. Resting might mean doing something as a family that maybe the kids don't love, but mom and dad get to rest, or vice versa. So I think you got to get creative with rest depending on the age. And for me, I think we're at a season now where when we have Sabbath days, when we rest, I love the idea of being intentional to enjoy the life God gave you.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's kind of the guiding principle. When we have a day of rest or Sabbath, it's like, okay, how can we intentionally as a family enjoy the day that God has given us? Typically that's off screens.
Mm-hmm.
Watch a movie as a family, but other than that, try to be off screens in nature, or, doing something as a family, or, sometimes my wife will go do something fun that's life-giving for her by herself, or I'll go do something fun, but really trying to be intentional to enjoy the life that God has given us. And I think sometimes we think, well, rest just means that I just got to sit and read a book, right? And it's like, well, maybe if that's life-giving, but maybe not, right? If it's not, I think we can get creative with our rest. But I think we want to get to a point. I think we want to get to a point where we crave the days where we can rest, and not where we're like, oh, well, I guess we should probably have a Sabbath, right? Like we want to create something that we look forward to. Sabbath and rest is supposed to be a gift from God, not a punishment.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. I remember, I think it was probably a couple of years ago now. I think it was probably during a winter season when our winters were free, where we had intentional Sabbaths, weekly Sabbaths. I think it was Saturdays, and it was like pretty much the whole day, which just seems insane to me right now. But it was so life-giving. Like we did nothing, like chores, anything. Like it was just, we had nothing scheduled or really planned. We just kind of slept in, got up, enjoyed some good meals together, which to our family brings a lot of life in our circle for sure. But yeah, sometimes it was movies, sometimes we played like video games together, sometimes we would just kind of do whatever, go outside, play, take walks, whatever. And man, those days became, I guess, kind of the thing that would kind of propel you through the rest of the week. Like it was something I just so looked forward to. I think it relationally, it did a lot for us as a family. Just being together and not having the chaos of life kind of breathing down our necks, whether that's work or school or play, whatever, teams are on, whatever. We were just able to be, and there was a lot of, yeah, it was just really life-giving. And then now to think about that in the season of life we're in right now, like that, it's just not in the cards to take a whole day to do that. So again, it's just another one of these things that my wife and I are always thinking about. How can we inject this concept of rest and Sabbath into our schedules? And for us right now, it may not be a whole day. It never is a whole day. It may not be all of us together. It might be just kind of moments, maybe if we're driving or to a location, or maybe if one of us has an afternoon or something where we can just kind of disconnect and just be, and finding times to do that and to plug that into our schedules can be a challenge, but I think it's something that we need to consider, because we aren't made to run at that rapid pace all the time. We have to kind of take those moments and rest and breathe. It's really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. For me, it's saying as a family, how can we move towards rest?
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're like, all right, we got to go from what we're doing currently to now we're going to honor a 24-hour Sabbath. Typically for most families that feels overwhelming. They just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, all right, what does it look like to move as a family towards Sabbath and rest? And like you just said, it may be a half day. It may be 3 hours, there's the ideal perfect world, and then there's reality. And so while we're moving towards ideal, that's just it. Let's move towards that, baby steps if we need to.
Right.
So what can we do to move towards more rest? What can we do to move towards living from a rested place? And let's just take baby steps in that direction.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really good. Yeah, because we're not going to be able to jump in or maybe you're in a situation where you can do that, where you can just plot out a whole day and you can just rest together as a family. If you can do that, I encourage you to do that. But for most of us, we just can't do that. So what can you do? Like, look at your calendar. What can you do? What can you plot out and kind of, we'll use a Christian word, right? Consecrate or kind of separate as your time for rest as a family, and just do what you can and take those moments. And I think you'll begin to see just the beauty of that and the restorative nature of that. And it will definitely, I think, what your appetite for more of that for sure. But you'll see the need that you have for that and that your kids have. And we can all benefit from that. So let's kind of get down to brass tacks here a little bit. How do we balance giving our kids opportunities, the cultural pressure that comes with all of this, with giving our family times and seasons of rest and reshifting our priorities? Like, how do we balance all of this as Christ following parents? How do we do that?
I thought you were going to have all the answers.
No, this is all you, bud.
So again, this is coming from someone whose family is very involved in sports, and have been wrestling. And my wife and I have been wrestling with this question as our kids are getting older, and we're in, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we're in the busiest season of our marriage, with 3 kids in sports. So for me, I think a couple things. First off, I think we have to be intentional to keep asking the question, what are my goals for my kids in this season? And is our calendar giving us the results we want? Yeah. And that doesn't mean we got to cancel all sports. I'm a big proponent. I think sports teach some beautiful life lessons. I think sports can develop a work ethic. Sports develop teamwork. I think, sports, if a kid is gifted in a sport, it can give them self-confidence, so I think there's a lot of, as someone who loves sports, played sports, and, I think our family will tell you some of our favorite moments as a family have come on, watching our kids play and watching them do what they love. My wife took a picture I coach my son's team, his baseball team, she took a picture of me. I'm the third base coach, and my son had reached third, and we were fist bumping. It's one of my favorite pictures we have of
Hmm.
all the pictures that we have. Um, so for me, it's a question of what are we trying to instill in our kids? What are
Yeah.
our goals? Is our calendar helping us towards those goals? Because here's the thing: not all teams are created equal. For example, not all coaches are created equal. And so just throwing your kid on a team and hoping that the coach, will instill good character in your kid and your kid will have a great experience. Like I've seen some teams that I would argue do the opposite
Yeah.
of instilling great character in kids, right? So, is what we're doing working with our goals for our kid, our character development goals, our work ethic goals, our spiritual life goals? Is our calendar working towards those things? Are the teams or the activities they're on helping them grow in Christ-like character and in development? And the answer may be yes. And if so, great. Then obviously we got to continue to be careful with the things we say yes to, because everything you say yes to, you're saying no to something else. And so I think we still got to be very intentional to guard our time and guard our yeses. But again, I think the overall picture is, what are our goals, and is the calendar helping us achieve those goals? Because if all we're doing is saying, well, we have an opening, so we're going to fill it in our
Hmm.
calendar, right? Like, well, we don't have anything going, so let's throw our kid in this sport, or let's do that activity. Um, that's where I think we can get into trouble if we're not continuing to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
And I think you got to keep asking, is this fun? Are our kids having fun? I've seen so many kids that are miserable and they're doing the sport because their parents making them.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is, um, while I certainly don't want my kids to quit, so there have been times where they've committed to something and I've said, hey, we're going to finish this out. So I get that aspect of it. I do think we got to be careful to make sure that, hey, um, sports are supposed to be fun, right? Extracurricular activities are supposed to be fun. Yes, they're developing character. Yes, they're developing work ethic. But if at the end of the day, if our kids are miserable, I just think there's other things we can be doing as a family.
Yeah, for sure.
So for me, it's our family has got to be having fun. Like right now, our family loves going to the baseball and softball diamonds. Like it's fun for our family, and so for us, it's not. We're not dragging our feet there. We're excited, and so I think in that case. But I will say we've also been intentional. We've put our kids on teams that are not going out of state. We're able to get to church most Sundays. We're able to, we're still finding time as a family, occasionally having a dinner together as a family. We're really trying to be intentional to still create those moments of rest and family in the midst of the busyness. And it's tough, but we do everything we can to be intentional to still make some of that happen. And so again, we're leaning towards rest now with as many games as we have on the calendar. Um, are we resting all the time? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But we are, again, I think the tension is we're living in America in 2025, letting our kids be involved in sports and do what they love. But we're also intentionally trying to make decisions that create margin when we can.
Mm. Yeah. Gosh, it's so hard. I want to lean into this just for a couple more seconds because I think this is so important. This idea of having goals for our children and in using our calendar as a tool to bring that about. I think that's so important. I think if we don't have an intentional conversation as parents about what we want for our children, what we want them to grow into, if we just kind of go with the default cultural norm, that is not going to produce Christ-likeness in our kids, right? That's not going to create healthy, Christ-following adults. That just isn't how that works. So if we just kind of default in what our culture is doing, it is not going to lead us where we as Christian parents want our children to be. So I think it's really important, to your point, just to have like a conversation of what is it that we What is it that we want our children to be when they grow up as adults? Well, what are some important things that we want to instill in them? How do we want to disciple our children as they are growing up through childhood, adolescence, and then into adulthood? What do we want them to be like on the other side? How do we want them to follow Jesus? And what do we want their priorities to be like? If we don't talk through those things, and if we just default to the cultural norm, like, that's going to be problematic. And then I loved your point about just using your calendar then to guide that, right? Or I guess more or less to have your goals guide your calendar. So if your priority is this, you're going to use your calendar to kind of lead them to that end. I love that. And I think that's an intentional conversation that we as parents need to have, and then to intentionally approach our calendar. And that might, man, this is even hard to even think and even say. That might mean saying no to different things that are maybe don't fall in line with your priorities and with your goals. And that can be really difficult, when our kid wants to do this or their friends are doing this and they want to do it as well. And that can be really difficult. Or maybe there's something inside of you and your identity wrapped up in your children and as a parent and in that participating in that sport or whatever, that can be difficult. I think we have to have this long-term view of our kids and the things that we want to, I guess the ways we want to kind of help guide them and disciple them as not just our children, but as members of Jesus' kingdom, as disciples of Jesus and followers of him, and how we can kind of structure our lives and our schedules to kind of, I don't know, give them the best shot at success in that area, if that makes sense. So I love that point. I think that's really, really important. And it's a difficult journey for all of us to kind of find that balance, to strike a good balance. It's going to take some trial and error for sure. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have seasons where we're just too much and we have to take steps back. But I think we need to be willing to kind of look in the mirror, to kind of have a family assessment. How are we doing right now? Kind of like we started at the top of this podcast. How are we doing right now? Is this something that is good for us, or is this something that is hurting us? And then being willing to respond accordingly to that.
Yeah, so good. And again, I think going back to what we said earlier, for me, and not that our family does this perfectly by any means, but for me, along with developing character in my kids, the things that we keep coming back to are Christian community and serving, right? Yeah. Like, we're not going to lose those two things. And so every family's different. We got to get creative with what that looks like. I coach my son's team. I love it, but it's also intentional that I got to be worked to be the head coach, because guess what? I schedule our practices. Mm-hmm. And so now I don't schedule our practices on Wednesday nights. I don't schedule games on Wednesday nights so he can get to youth group and be a part of Christian community. And we have our kids serving at church. Not every week are there times when, occasionally we let them attend a sports thing and they miss a church event. Sure. But as a rhythm, as part of our family culture, they are serving at church because we value that. And so, again, we're not doing it perfectly. The goal is not to do it perfectly, but the goal is to keep the main things. Like, what are the non-negotiables that are going to be a part of our family? And we're going to fight for those things. And again, those are two of the big ones for us, along with just normal character development in them. But I think every family just has to ask that question and then make sure that they're creating a calendar that allows that to happen. And again, there's going to be tension, right? Because of the busy world we live in. So I don't think it's about perfection as much as it is progress and identifying those things that are important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. And I think too, just as parents, community is just so important. Like in every stage of life and in every issue, it's just so important. And I think one of my hopes for this podcast is that we can start having these conversations that we deal with as a way to provide a community of people who are discussing this and dealing with this together. So I think as parents, we need to do our due diligence, have these conversations within the context of our family. But it feels a lot better when we're doing this together, right? When we're having these conversations together, when we're helping each other, when we are bouncing things off of each other. expressing the hardships of it or the difficulties or how confusing it is or difficult it is. I think it's so important to have a group of people who are doing this with us. And regardless of what that issue is, it makes it easier when you have a group doing it with you. I think when we're dealing with these issues that are just so baked into our cultural moment, previously we talked about cell phone usage and social media and how difficult that can be, because it can really feel like if you make changes to how your family does this, you are alone. You're the only person on the planet doing that. And that's not the reality, but it can feel that way. So in these issues where we as Christians feel like we are swimming upstream when we're trying to do something differently in these areas, man, it can just feel so much better when we know we have the support of a group of people, a community, people who are walking through the same season of life, trying to do the same things that we're doing. So wherever we're listening to this or engaging with this, man, I just pray that you would just be able to find that community of people and to put around you who are like mind, who are wanting to do these same things and implement these same things and to prioritize, the kind of the same way we are as Christians, and to just lean on that community, to rely on them, to bounce things off of them, and to be encouraged by them, to be held accountable. Man, we need accountability because it's tough. So man, that is my prayer, is that in some way, whether it's through this podcast or through your interactions at church or wherever, that you would have that community that you would be able to walk through it's tough stuff like this with, because it just makes it so easy. So I pray that would, man, be the case, because that is difficult. John, you know of any good resources that we can engage with to kind of help us as we think about rest and busyness and all of this stuff? Anything good that you've came across?
Well, I know we both love The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer.
Yeah.
So I know you would recommend that. I know I would recommend that. That book really, when I read it a few years ago, it really challenged, I guess, my idea of a good life, and even really just made me evaluate the pace of life that I was living at. So highly recommend that one. I don't know if you have anything to add about that book.
No, just I would double down. You should definitely read it. It was very instrumental in helping me realize just how crazy our schedules can be and the negative impacts of it. And then it very practically gives you some insights onto how you can practice rest and Sabbath and those things. So love that one. That's a great one.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another book I thought of, Trophy Child by Ted Cunningham, was a great book I read many years ago. And it speaks to what you brought up earlier, Zach, in that sometimes we put these expectations on our children, right? We want them to get all the trophies, but it's really not about them. It's about us and our ego. And Ted Cunningham, I enjoy the way he writes, and he really unpacks that well in that book, and really helps parents remember what raising kids is all about. And does a great way, does an excellent job of just helping us see maybe our patterns of placing a weight on our children to perform that really has nothing to do with them and everything to do with us.
Yep.
And so that might be a great book to check out as well, if you feel like you have a tendency to do that, or if you have younger kids at home and you're starting to get into extracurricular activities, that's a great one to check out.
The kind of the thing that made me kind of realize that this issue of how I put so much of my identity in my children kind of came through a book, Parenting by Paul David Tripp, that just came to me as you were talking. Again, another really good book, kind of general parenting book, but it was this idea of how we just look at parenting in our role as parents and what that is. And it helped really put that into perspective for me and helped alleviate some of the burdens and pressures that I just have been feeling of as a parent too. So that's another one that's helpful. There's probably a million different resources that you can check out. And I encourage you to check out these three and whatever else that you can get your hands on as we continue to engage.
Yeah. And I can't help but give a shout out to David Thomas and Sissy Goff and all their work. But one of their books, Are My Kids on Track?
Yeah.
Is a great book because it helps you, again, if you're maybe you're trying to figure out what are our priorities for our kid in this season of life that they're in. Are My Kids on Track kind of lays down what we should be focusing on at every season of our kids' development, both spiritually, emotionally. So that might be another one. That would be great if you're sitting here trying to discern, okay, like what are the important things that I should be focused on when it comes to my child in this season. That might be a great one to check out.
Yeah, that is a great book as well. Okay. Great conversation. Just kind of feel like we're barely scratching the surface, but I guess that's all this was meant to do. So I appreciate the conversation, John. Appreciate just your ministry. Appreciate, man, everyone listening. And I just want to close in prayer as we kind of wrap up this conversation.
Yeah, love it, love you, man, and thankful for your friendship. And I agree. I think this is just a scratching the surface of this topic, but I hope parents will walk away not feeling alone. If you feel like your calendar is crazy busy, and but also feeling empowered to think through your priorities, your goals for your family, and be able to take some baby steps in creating a schedule that works for you.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just are grateful. We're grateful for this conversation. We're grateful that we can have these conversations in the context of the community that you've created for your church. We're grateful that we can be a part of that. We're just grateful for the many things that we have in our lives, and many opportunities our children have to engage in different ways and grow and develop through those things, establish relationships with other kids and adults. All these things are good and helpful. And just personally, I'm grateful just for the opportunity to engage with my kids in that context, to be able to participate in that as a coach, and just to sit back and watch it happen as a spectator as well. For the great moments that we've had together as we have been traveling, or as we've been out on the soccer field or wherever else. Lord, those moments are great and they are precious, and I thank you so much for them. But I also pray that you would just give us wisdom as we, as parents, try to just balance all of these things well. The good things, the pros that come with the things that we are engaged in, but then also recognizing that there is a negative side, a downside to some of these things if we aren't focused on the right things, or if we aren't creating margin and times for rest in our own schedule. So I pray that you would give each one of us just a wisdom and discernment to be able to look at our lives, our family lives, and to assess properly, just the health of our families in the middle of these seasons. That we would see maybe if there's areas where we are just exhausted and running ragged, and that we'd be willing to step out in boldness and maybe say no to a few things, or to take a step back, or just to find those times to rest, and to do that as a family. So I pray that you would just guide us in that, each individually and as families, to be able to adequately assess where we are, and to be able to step out in boldness and to respond the way that you are calling us to. Father, we just want to be a part of what you're doing in our kids' lives, and be a part of the discipleship process, knowing that we aren't the Holy Spirit, that we aren't the sole discipler in our children's lives. Thank you so much for that reality as well. But Lord, I just pray that we be sensitive to your Spirit, how you are leading us as a couple of the main sources of discipleship in our kids' lives. Help us to know how to do that and how to approach that well. And Lord, ultimately just use us as tools in your hand. Lord, we just give our children's lives to you. Ask that you would take them and use them, Lord, for your kingdom and for your glory. So I just thank you for this conversation. Lord, I pray that this conversation would continue on within our families and within our groups, Lord, of community, and that we would continue to consider how we can do this better, how we can organize our lives, our calendars better, Lord, ultimately to bring you glory in all things. So we thank you for this conversation. We love you and we trust you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.